playback as well. All right, so there we go. So good afternoon, everyone, once more. My name is Jeremiah Sullivan, Executive Director of the School of Communication, Media, and Journalism at Kean University. Thank you for joining us for yet another spring panel. Every spring for the last 4 or 5 years now, we have done this, and we've covered a whole litany of topics. Quite honestly, this is one I thought we would hopefully get to in the near future. Didn't know it would be this year, but I'm glad we are tackling it. For anybody who's joining us, you are in the right room. It is the question that you should be thinking about is, I've got the job now, how do I keep it? And how do I stay in that role? And how do I grow within that role? We have 3 wonderful panelists with us today. I'm going to introduce you to them in just a moment. They'll briefly tell you about themselves. And I have a couple of questions I could ask, but we really want this event to be all about you. So please feel free to ask any and all questions that may be on your mind. We have students from Kean University as well as elsewhere, and members of the Kean community as well as elsewhere as well. So a really wonderful event today to bring everybody together. So without further ado, I'd like to start by introducing our first panelist, Christina Stokes of Rubenson. Christina, would you care to give us a little background?
Hey everybody, feel free to join us on camera
Yes,
if you feel like it today. I am Christina Stokes. I'm the Vice President and Director of Talent Acquisition at Rubenstein. We are a New York City-based strategic communications and reputation management agency. So yes, we do PR. And I've been with the firm, it'll be 4 years in May, if you can believe that. I can't believe it. But I'm happy to be here. I've been working in recruitment and talent acquisition in the communications umbrella for over 10 years, specifically in the PR space for most of that time. And working in-house at Rubenstein is amazing. I work with a lot of professionals across many different sectors of client expertise. And I hire from the entry level, recent college graduates, all the way through the most senior level at our organization. So hopefully I can give you guys a lot of advice today, whether you are looking for insights into the job hunt itself or what to do once you're actually there, since I deal with that as part of the human resources and executive committee team at my firm all the time. So lots of advice to share, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And that's why I want to speak as little as possible when I get to our panelists. So next we're going to have Suzanne Patkovic from NJ Advanced Media. Suzanne, if you care to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm glad to be here and be part of this program. So I am an editor, as a professor said, at New Jersey Advanced Media. I started out the Star Ledger. So New Jersey Advanced Media, for those who don't know, represents the Star Ledger and NJ.com, among other properties. I am a lifelong New Jersey journalist. All my experience is in journalism. All of it is here in New Jersey. I have been able to work on many stories over the years. I've been around for a while. Big stories. I've been able to work on hundreds of crime stories and news stories and feature stories, everything from the big stories we all remember, the dorm fire at Seton Hall, 9/11, to the everyday stories that make up life here in New Jersey. I have worked with dozens and dozens and hundreds of reporters and editors, photographers, over the years. I also have seen a lot of people come into the business and stay. The business requires a lot of resilience. I've seen the profession change quite a bit. Obviously, I started out in a print environment, and now we're all digital. Primarily digital. I mean, we still have newspapers, but the basics remain the same. The basics are, if you want to be in this business, you want to go out, cover the news, tell the stories fairly, accurately, the basics are still there. And journalism, yes, it has changed and evolved, but obviously it's still needed. We see it more and more. It is a profession that requires a lot of grit and a lot of tenacity. These days, the feedback reporters and photographers and videographers get is pretty immediate, pretty intense at times. But it's a profession guaranteed by the Constitution, and it will continue to evolve. And I would say for those who are interested in joining the profession, some stay their whole career, as I have done. It also is a tremendous foundation, a very good foundation for a lot of other jobs. And I'm sure Christina and Brian who are on the opposite side would say, I would be surprised if they have not hired journalists at some point. Journalism prepares you for a lot of professions, gives you a very good foundation. And at that, I'll stop and let others speak.
Thank you, Suzanne. And now we segue right to Brian. Brian Murphy of Coyne PR, also our PRSA chapter's professional advisor. So Brian, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. And actually, it's funny you just said that, because we're now in the midst, actually just submitted a resume for a friend of mine who used to be the New York bureau chief for USA Today. We have a client, a high profile client, that they themselves have a fairly large internal PR and comms group made up of a lot of former journalists. So we're now getting into the process of trying to bring journalists on board to kind of communicate journalist to journalist, because, there's certain language and things like that where they kind of understand, and Suzanne probably gets that. So yeah, definitely. But thank you for having me. I first and foremost, I'm a proud graduate of Kean. I won't tell you what year. You can tell by my face, I'm fairly old, so but that's okay. I've been in as a practitioner in the world of public relations for more than 20 years now. I currently am a senior vice president at Coyne PR. We're one of the largest independent firms in the country. We're based right here in New Jersey, in Parsippany. We do have a satellite office in New York City as well. For the most part, my day, there's never one day that's the same. So I kind of consider myself a jack of all trades. So you really have to understand, the further up the ladder you get, the world of business, because so much of what I do now is budgets and things of that nature. But overall, my responsibilities include just general client management, development of overall communication strategies, budget development, working with procurement, and then really looking at the team and developing teams and building teams and fostering their growth, because I believe, as somebody who leads the group, and this is something that I pass down to the folks who work for me, is your responsibility, yes, is to the client, but really it's for the growth of the people who are working for you, because when they grow and they move up the ladder, you then are doing something right, because you yourself should be growing and moving up the ladder. So very excited to be here, and I'm also very excited that I'm a very new member to the board of directors for the Kean University Foundation as well. So very much looking forward, thank you, to working with the group and working with the university to provide opportunity and develop plans and programs to really help the students. Or, you gotta help those in your family, and that's what I feel like we are. We're a big family. So.
Brian, we appreciate you being here, as well as Suzanne and Christina, and all your contributions and all those that are yet to come. If anybody hasn't gotten the message yet, this is a good panel to ask a lot of questions to. So please ask those questions away. I'm going to start off with one, and hopefully this is the last one I ask. Here it comes. Whoever wants to take it first, and hopefully we hear from all three of you, from the HR perspective, Christina, Brian from PR, and then obviously Suzanne from journalism. What are the qualities you look for when hiring a new college student, or maybe even a new employee? Maybe that student's been out maybe a year or so. There's that conversation out there that you can teach skills, but there's certain qualities that you really want to see. So can any of you speak to that?
I can take a first stab at this answer. So I think there's two sides to it, right? There's the tactical skills, and then there are the things, like you said, Jeremiah, you just can't teach certain things. So at Rubenstein and other agencies that I've done the staffing for, I think some of those key things are inherently the same across the board. We look for people with excellent writing skills, folks who are really good researchers, who can not just find the information, but can think critically and find a way to make sense of that information and then communicate that effectively to the next party, right? So all those levels of research skills, and people who can communicate across different mediums, face-to-face, over video, in an email, all of these different ways of communicating are very important, especially when you are working across industries and with people at different levels who prefer to communicate in different ways. So you have to be able to kind of check those boxes. And then on the other side, I think we really, or what I prefer to see in people that I'm interviewing and folks that I'm bringing on board to the company, I like to I like to just see energy and curiosity. You know, I understand not everybody is an extrovert like me. Some people just, they work differently. They want to keep their camera off. You know, they prefer to think about something before coming to the table with an answer or something to say, which is fine. You know, that's all well and good. But I think being curious, never saying no when someone's giving you a new task, wanting to try something new. I think people like that have that curiosity, that are very well read and up to date on current events, that get their news from a number of sources, online and otherwise. I think those are people that do exceptionally well at my firm. And I think those are some qualities that you could really put into play anywhere.
Suzanne or Brian, anybody care to couple that?
I'll go next. I would, different fields, but the same qualities really. Curiosity that's the first word I was going to bring up. I mean, we're journalists, and so we have to be interested and curious about the world around us. When we interview people, we need people who are aware of what's going on, not only in New Jersey, but around the world. And also people who are interested in their profession, this profession that we're in. Know how it's changing, what's going on, what the issues are, what the ethics are. And I come back to what I said earlier. We're looking for people who are resilient. You have to go out and answer questions. We are confronting people in many cases who don't want to talk to us. You know, we have to, we're the last people they want to see or hear from. So if they say no 99 times, we have to ask 100 times. We have to be, aggressive and know how to get the story, but to get the story in a way that works. And then photographers, videographers. For editors, I mean, editors are more behind the scene. Editors are the ones, back in the room, doing the intake, getting the stories, the photos, and everything ready for publication. But in most of the people, who start out in this business are starting out in reporting or as a photographer or out there in the field. Obviously the pandemic has changed things for now, but that's, we're getting back to the field. And so looking for people who are just have a lot of energy, are curious, or want to get the story. When something happens, they want to know, how it happened, why it happened, and are able to write and tell that story on whatever platform we have. I mean, whether we're putting it out there as a story, a print story, where we're putting it out as a podcast, we're putting it out as a video, be able to tell the story and tell it in different mediums.
Right.
I agree with all that, but I think for me, my perspective is a little bit different. So for somebody like Christina, she's at the very front end of the process. So I'm sure, like we do, we have a very specific process in which the applicants go through the HR team and so forth. And then from there, based on that, they're assigned, depending on which teams are looking for what and at what levels, they determine, wow, this person would be great for this team. And then from there, I'm a big proponent of, I want everybody on my team to meet this individual, because I'm looking at it as I'm trying to build a dream team. Mm-hmm. So my assumption, and you really should never assume, but I look at the resumes, they're very accomplished. I look at theirs compared to mine when I was entering the field. I'm like, holy cow, I'd never get a job today compared to, some of these kids in the resumes, I'm like blown away. So my understanding is you put your head down, you've done the work for however many years, and many of them we get with advanced degrees, and that's all really good. But when you come to me, I'm asking questions about how would you deal with this particular scenario, or what are you like as a manager? And a lot of times people take a step back because they're young and they're like, I never thought of it. Like, are you a team player? I mean, I can function and be successful if we work as a team. But really, quite frankly, are you just a good person? Like, don't be an a-hole. There's no room for that. Like, I'm sorry to be blunt, but like, that's the bottom line. Just be a good person. Be somebody who's willing to learn. You want to take on different responsibilities. You want to continue that maturation process, and you're just not happy with the status quo. And if you're like that, I can work with you. That's totally cool, because you would have gotten through everybody else. And I'm telling you, the people that are at entry level at our firm and mid level, they're tough. If you're getting past them up to this rank, then from that standpoint, you have the chops. So
I appreciate it. We are going to open the chat for any questions that you have. Feel free to drop a question in there, or if anyone wants to chime in, feel free.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So, in terms of like searching for a job, what advice would you have for me? Because I would like to try to find an internship at some point. And what challenges should I expect in like searching for a job?
Open question to the group here. Either a job or internship. When's the right time for either? And what are some of the hurdles you could expect these students may be facing?
I think a lot of organizations definitely offer internship opportunities to people who are a little further away from their graduation, and even to folks who have already gotten out of school. Internships are always super helpful, and when I'm hiring for entry-level people, I always look to see if someone has existing internship experience in the field or something related. A lot of the candidates that I consider, they've worked in their university's newspaper, for instance, or they've interned at a PR firm, or they've done some social media comms in-house somewhere, whatever the case may be, all these things are somehow relevant. So maybe it's not just, I did a PR internship every year throughout my college education, and here I am, I have all this experience already. It's okay if you maybe have more myriad experience across a few different relevant industries, but if you can and you have the bandwidth to try to get an internship, you should. I think it's always helpful to get that experience and exposure for sure. And every opportunity is a networking opportunity. So the people you're working with in your internships, they're going to be your references. They're going to think of you in the future when they have hiring needs. They're going to recommend you to the people they know in the industry that might be looking for someone with your skill set. So even something like this, a roundtable conversation, you're getting to know professionals in the industry, and all of these contacts that you're making are super valuable. So all those things will help you in your job hunt, either for a full-time role or for an internship.
Anybody else care to comment?
I agree. I think whatever track you're on, once again, I speak obviously to journalism. I mean, there are several ways to show interest in the profession: writing for your college newspaper, or writing for your local newspaper, or working for a local website, getting, covering stories. We definitely, we have interns, we have different types of internships. And I talked to our manager who handles the internships yesterday, and he said, number one thing he looks for is that people who are coming, knocking on our door, are people who have shown an interest in the profession because they are involved in it. There somehow, and I think in some ways there are more opportunities perhaps now than years ago. I mean, of course we had college newspapers back in the old days, but there are local websites that are looking for help. There are ways to get yourself to write, to get published, to get on to do work that you can bring to the table.
Anybody else care to comment?
And it shows that you're interested.
All right, so we'll jump to another question. Does anybody else want to chime in with a question from either the chat or the audience? Christian, thank you for your question. We have one coming in from the chat here. So what's one thing you would tell your past self during your first entry-level role in your industry? If you could go way, way back and give them that word of advice, what would it be?
I think I'll leave it to Suzanne and Brian, only because my upbringing was not as a PR or journalism professional.
Okay. Brian or Suzanne?
You go, Brian. I spoke last.
Yeah, it's kind of tough because I was so, when I graduated college, I took the first job that was offered to me, and that was a sales job. I didn't have anything. I mean, I tell a story, I had a car where the seat, every time you'd step on the gas, it would throw you in the back because the welds left. I didn't have, I just needed a job. So I took a job as a sales rep, and I did that for a year. And then I took a job in PR because I studied as a communications major. But for the world of PR, organization is so critical, and your ability to multitask is beyond. And Suzanne would know this, being a journalist. You have to be able to do multiple things at one time. I think when I first entered, I didn't realize that as much. You would be singularly focused on a particular task, and then push everything back, and then all it does is it just builds on itself, and you get buried. And so I would say, if just starting out, I probably would have taken more classes from an organizational perspective to get a better awareness of what that really entails, because it's so important, especially in an entry-level position, to be able to master those skills.
Suzanne, would you care to chime in?
I would say, thinking back, I would have encouraged people to get a mentor who's not your boss. And I would encourage you to get maybe more than one mentor. Get a mentor who's at your level, someone who is doing entry-level work, more of a buddy, I suppose, and then get a mentor who's more experienced, who's not, as I said, who's not your boss, who you could run ideas by, maybe even run stories by before they you give them to your editor if you're writing stories or whatever. But to have weekly or whatever meetings, discussions with a mentor who can help you guide through because you're going to be facing a lot of new situations, and help you navigate new territory. And not only that, but to, key you into the culture and the protocols of the organization you've joined. So that would be my suggestion.
Christina, do you want to chime in as well, or with that tip? It may not be journalism related, but
yeah, I mean, all of that definitely makes sense. I think having mentors across level is super important if you have access to that. Again, this is why these conversations are so important, to identify those people who are willing to help you and talk to you and coach you throughout your career. The nice thing is some organizations have, mentorship programs already embedded into their structure, which is, it's nice if you can find that. But I think being part of different committees as well is another way, just in case you can't identify that. And a lot of other organizations within the field of communications in general, not just specific to PR, they offer mentorship like groups where you can go and find a mentor and be paired with someone potentially. So it's worth looking that up if you're seeking someone to mentor you.
I see we have another question in the chat here coming in from Christian, and we appreciate those questions. Send them in. This actually is an issue I had heard previously when I was serving as our internship director, and I still kind of hear it from students. A lot of times it's not so much the skills that are oriented with the job, but it's almost once you're on the job, how do you kind of find that balance between becoming that professional yet still being that person that people can kind of connect with as well? I mean, those interpersonal dynamics. When you're on your first job or in your first role, how do you handle that? And how do you kind of develop those skills to communicate effectively as Christian is on the job?
If I could take that one, because
Please.
That's a little bit of a couple things. Number one, we've instituted a learning program at our agency at multiple levels, but specifically for entry level. And that's actually a topic of discussion that's taught by a number of people within our firm. The fact of the matter is, one of the things that draws me to this business and this profession is I'm very interested in people. I love to hear people's stories. I love to hear where they're from. I see people. This is one of the things I miss dearly about not being in the office, is the ability to walk into the kitchen and see somebody and say hi. And if they're new, just strike up the conversation. Do not be afraid, please. I can't even tell you the countless times I've walked in the hallways or in the kitchen, and somebody fairly young, and they don't look up. And I have theories about screens and the work that's being done in front. You get so used to just being down here. You have to have the ability to pick your head up and look around, because so much of what we do, and this is across the board for any business, it's about relationships and being able to develop relationships and cultivate relationships. And if there's an inability for you to pick your head up and say hi and start a conversation, that's an issue regardless of the profession that you're in. So just be yourself, but not everybody's an extrovert, and I get that, but you have to have, you're in a professional work environment. You have to be able to communicate and strike up a conversation. And and believe me, I've had very high level people in my firm come to me and be like, who's this new person on your team? I saw him in the kitchen. They didn't even say hi. That's not a good thing. You know, like just take a flyer. It's okay to say hi to somebody. They're not going to bite your head off.
Suzanne, have you seen this in terms of the journalism standpoint? I'm thinking the buzz and the busyness of the newsroom, and all of a sudden here's somebody in that environment for the first time trying to figure out how to operate those interpersonal dynamics.
I guess because I've always been in a newsroom, that's all I know. I have found
It's just
newsrooms are, you know, since it's not office based, right? Everyone's sitting around. It's a newsroom, and it's generally very supportive. I have to say that wherever I've worked at, you know, you generally have tiers. You know, you have the entry level, and there's generally a lot of support. I mean, there are people of our like minds by and large. I mean, there are people who, you know, don't come into the profession, decide they don't like it, and it's not for them. But by and large, I mean, I think there are like-minded people, and the environment is generally very supportive if you speak it out. I mean, and I understand what Brian is saying. I mean, there are times when someone will say, a reporter or someone will start, and a year later I'll say to another editor, did you say so, you know, see so-and-so? And they say, I've never met him. And that's probably not a person that's not going to be around for a long time. I mean, generally, it is a team environment, and that's how we succeed, because when news breaks, it's a team effort.
I appreciate those answers. I think they're very valuable for everybody on the call to kind of think about. Just another question from our list I wanted to throw in here, and then we'll pivot back to our guests who are joining us today as well. When you look at the onboarding process, you know, how critical those first 30, 60, 90 days are when you get that job. And we know how long sometimes the interview process these days is to kind of get to that point. You know, beyond picking that head up, Brian, and saying hi in the kitchen, or Christina maybe looking around and surveying who a good mentor may be in time, what's kind of like the checklist or the gotta do's in those first 30, 60, 90 days for an employee really to kind of to set their roots and feel like they're at home?
I think a lot of that might have to do with how the organization sets up onboarding. For us, you know, for the past year, everything has been fully virtual, and we're hoping for a return in the fall, right? But during this time, that entire process, we're trying to keep to the basic tenets of what bringing someone on should look like. So a lot of the time, some of the things are similar. You know, for someone's first 2 weeks with our organization, we are setting up specific times for training, for meetings with their entire team and with other people across the agency that they should know, right, from different groups. I try to set up opportunities for people at the same level to meet with their peers from different teams. I think that's very important. If the organization you're coming into uses a platform like Slack or something like that, join all those different groups and rooms that you can where, you know, people are just talking, because we, like Brian was saying, we don't have that social element of just running into each other by the water cooler right now. So what's your virtual water cooler look like, right? How are you meeting people across the organization, and how are you becoming part of that team? So in those first few weeks, while you're training and onboarding and meeting people, raise your hand, ask questions, participate where you can, you know, offer your work where you can if you're not completely full right away with things to do. And that's just within the first couple of weeks. When you're at 1 month, I always set up a check-in with people to make sure they're hitting those marks, that they have the tools they need, that they may, if they need additional training in any area, you know, we get them that right away so that they're not falling behind in any way. By 60 days, you're already embedded in client work. You know, you have your day-to-day tasks. You should be in some kind of a rhythm at that point with your work, and maybe getting more work than you can handle. Welcome to the agency world. And then by 3 months, you're a set employee. I really think that you've found your footing, you know your team, but that doesn't mean you should stop finding ways to communicate with people outside of your group and your day-to-day. So any way that you can participate in a company outside of just what your work is, I think you should be doing that because it will benefit you socially at the company and your career trajectory. The more people who know you and who you are and what you're capable of, it's honestly the better for you and your growth in any organization.
Thanks, Christina. Brian or Suzanne, care to chime in on that?
We've developed in the past, I'd say, I don't know, 5 years maybe, we've developed a very structured onboarding process. And where you come in, of course, at that point, you've already met your supervisor, you meet people on your team, and then you have sessions with our research librarian who shows you everything that we have. You sit down with our social media editor and learn our social media policy. We have people who go over, the software we use, ARC, Merlin, Slack, all those programs. We have people sit down and go through it all. And that's a rather recent development for us. I would say in the past, like I said, past few years, we have this, the process. And then, I mean, I agree with everything Christina said. I mean, you start to, the first week or so, you're learning where everything that's available to you. And at that point, then it's really a matter of doing the job, doing as much as you can, not turning down assignments, as she said, embracing every assignment, because many of them have potential, and just forming a network of support throughout the newsroom, because people can help you. I mean, if you're in our profession, I mean, one day you might be writing about crime, another day taxes, another day something else. And there's a lot of expertise in the room. And I always say into the expertise available. There's a lot of expertise in the room. Tap into that. Ask questions. We're in the business of asking questions. And tap into the expertise that's available. Don't be shy about it. It doesn't mean you don't know about it. It means you're going to the expertise. And I think that's what I would, don't be shy about. There's a lot available to you, and don't be shy about tapping into it.
Yeah, if I can just piggyback off of what Suzanne is saying also, ask for feedback all the time. If you don't have set meetings with your supervisors or account team leads or wherever you're working, whoever your boss is or your go-to person, ask for feedback from the people you're doing work for in an internship or a full-time job, because you need to know how to set those marks for yourself to make sure you're reaching the goals. Maybe there is no clear 30, 60, 90 plan for you where you're working. So create that for yourself so you know you're reaching your potential and then growing beyond that, you know?
All very, very valuable advice. Brian,
sorry, just to interrupt, but that's a good point. You should know where you stand, and you should know where you stand. If that feedback isn't coming to you naturally, you should seek it out. I agree with that 100%.
Brian, do you care to add anything to this part of the conversation?
Sure. I mean, I agree with all of that. I know with our firm, we have policies in place where we do, to Christina's point, where we do regular coordinated check-ins through our review system, so that you have a formal sit down, because we also have to understand that every time you sit in front of your manager, the focus should be on you. What are you doing? What do you need to focus on? In terms of a 30, 60, 90-day plan, I don't know if we necessarily have that as much as we have level plans. So based on your level, these are all the different things we're going to work to ensure that you're achieving, because we want you to achieve those so we can get you out of that level into the next level so that we can bring somebody else in to do that level. So it's it's this kind of whole leapfrog thing. But yeah, we're finding more and more when you do the formal check-in, those are great because it's different than just, hey, you mind if I swing by? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but the formal check-ins tend to work out really well.
All such valuable advice, and I hope everyone is really just soaking this in on the call today. We're going to go to Karen Boyle, our PRSSA chapter president. She has a question she'd like to ask. Karen?
Hi, everybody. So you guys mentioned curiosity and having energy when you start a job and being a team player, but what makes somebody an unfit candidate, or what can make that ideal candidate turn to be an unfit candidate? Maybe through the interview process, or just looking at their resume, or even when you have them on board for a couple of days?
I think something that tends to stand out early on, Karen, is really when someone is not receptive to feedback. I think being able to stay humble and accept feedback that is critical and maybe not delivered very compassionately, which you will not find from every manager. You have to be able to absorb that feedback, take it in, apply it, and try to deliver better results the next time, And I think people who are not as receptive to feedback tend to sink before they can swim. So I think just being open to learning and growing and being able to grow from your feedback and learn the right way to do something, or the better way or the different way, however something is being asked of you, I think that is a challenge for some people to take that kind of feedback with grace, and not internalize it too much. Someone is just trying to help you grow and get the right work product out there. That's one thing that definitely stands out as where some people may go wrong very early on.
I would,
go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to build on what Christina was saying. I'm also a big advocate or proponent, or I look out for your nonverbal cues. I'm big into that. Like if I'm giving feedback to somebody, and I've had all different types of people work for me. You could be saying one thing, but your body language, your facial expressions could be completely different. And that is, quite frankly, more of a concern for me than the words that come out of your mouth. I've had people that have worked for me that have been stone cold. You don't know if they're happy. You don't know if they're sad, but they do a killer job. So you're kind of like, all right, but if I have to play in a poker tournament, I want this person with me. I've had some people where you might as well just write the diary on their face, because you can read their face just tells it all. So when accepting the feedback and some, that could be new for some people. Christine's probably experienced this. I mean, if you were the straight A student and you're coming in and you were this and Pi Sigma, all this other stuff, and then all of a sudden now you get into the position and now somebody's criticizing your writing, and not criticizing in a bad way, but saying, here, I'll make some edits, and you're not used to that. That can be a hard thing, and it's understood, but be able to accept it. But be careful how you physically accept that, because that could also be a huge tell, and something that's can kind of play your hand a little bit.
Suzanne, what do you see in the world of journalism when it comes to a question like this?
Okay.
I mean, I think just to be open to assignments. I mean, we got to do a lot of different things, and not every assignment is top of the heap. And to not be negative about assignments you're given, especially early on. I mean, obviously, everyone wants to work on stories and videos and photos and projects that they want, but the bread and butter of journalism sometimes can be, is what is needed. And, not to say no and try to make the best of assignments. And I agree. I mean, you have people coming in, generally we hire people who have done very well in school. And then all of a sudden I'm an editor, for instance, start editing stories, and to say, I don't think this lead works, or this nut graph, or go down a list, or it needs to be reworked, not to get defensive.
And it's actually, you bring up a point. I know Christian had a question. We're going to get to him in just a second, but you bring up a point that one of our students shared in our kind of prep session last week for this event. How do you kind of raise your hands up during those early days and say, maybe I'm feeling a little overwhelmed, or I think this may be getting away from me? And how do you have that conversation so early on when you're trying to find your place and trying to, to be perhaps maybe that student you were as a professional? How do you pump the brakes maybe and say, I need help? If the help is what you need.
I would, sorry, go ahead, Christine.
No, go ahead. You can go first this time.
Probably the bravest thing you can say is help. Listen, we're not in a business to have people drowned and be so overloaded that they're working 20-hour days. Like, that's not the business we're in. We're here to do a job on behalf of a client and to produce the best results possible. It's incumbent upon the manager to understand their team and to understand the individuals and to identify. I keep reiterating this. So for the folks who are looking to get into this business or any other business, your ability to read an individual from a nonverbal perspective is so important, because if you can understand how they're feeling, they may not be able to verbalize it, but you as the manager need to be the more mature one and say, is everything okay? Are you feeling okay? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Is there anything I can do to help? Currently, and consistently reiterating, we have a team here. This isn't the burden on one person, but it's also incumbent upon you as now a professional and adult to raise your hand and say, I'm having trouble. I need help. And I've had people say, I'm having trouble organizing my day. Cool. Let's sit down. Let's look at your to-do list, and I'm going to help you go through your day. And you do that a couple times, and they get it, and they start going off and they do it on their own. They feel empowered. And then, okay, then we can tackle the next thing. So just don't be afraid. Raise your hand. Say help. Nobody's going to think differently of you.
Good advice. Suzanne or Christina?
I was going to agree with what Brian's saying. And also I wanted to point out, I mean, every place you might work might be different in terms of who should be your go-to person for things. We try to set up, at Rubenstein, we try to set up a really nice structure. Like, all my new hires know they can reach out to me at any point if they have a question or they don't know where to direct their question to. There's someone on my team who does a lot of the onboarding training, so she ends up being a point of contact for people. There's a manager specific to account coordinator managers who ends up being a point person. Then of course there are your peers in your group that you should be able to communicate with if you're getting lost. I think finding those people right out of the gate as soon as you can. Who are my go-to people? Is it my direct manager for these kinds of questions? Is it, you can kind of figure that out in your first 1 or 2 weeks with an organization, who your go-tos should be and can be. And just keep that in mind, I think, when you have those questions. But also to the other point that was being made before, that we were talking about, how someone might not be the right fit or something like that. In the PR agency space, and I know Brian can attest to this also, all the work you do for a client, and not every client is going to be the sexiest piece of business you will ever get your hands on, but it's still important, and someone's story still needs to be told, and there's still a goal there. So even if you don't love something you're working on, there will be really exciting work to follow as well. So do what you can to get to know that business, get to know the story, and just execute the best work that you can. You're building a career, and every piece of work that you produce is the most important piece of work that you're going to produce.
Sorry, Christian, you had a question there?
Yes. So, how can we learn to absorb, feedback and criticism without getting defensive? Because it's very easy to get defensive when someone, corrects you, and depending on how the person delivers the message, especially if it's very aggressive, it's very easy to put your hands up and be ready to spar back verbally, because I've been in those situations, and it's not a good feeling at all.
Well, Christian, we appreciate you bringing the question to the floor. Christina, I don't know if you want to take it from an HR perspective, or Brian or Suzanne from a leadership perspective in your organizations. How do you handle the person who's not used to getting that feedback?
I honestly, Christian, the feedback that you get can either be delivered with a lot of love, or it can be delivered very aggressively. It depends on the person giving you the feedback and how busy they are and the kind of day they're having. And a lot of the times it's not about you or as a professional or as a person. And you have to take a step back from it. You have to take yourself out of it and just listen to what they're saying about your work, and think about how to improve. Take the facts away from what they're saying and take your personal feelings out of it for the moment, you know? And if you find in that conversation, and I've given this advice to people that I work with who maybe did not have a very good feedback conversation, if you find yourself getting very upset in a conversation, it's okay to stay quiet, absorb the information that's being given to you, and say, I want to take a minute to internalize the feedback you've given me. Can I, just take a second to review my work and come back to you with some potential solutions? And you can kind of remove yourself from a situation, still absorb their feedback, do the work, and come back to the room when you're more prepared to handle the conversation. You have to kind of find a way to navigate difficult conversations, be they with your supervisor or with a client who's pissed off about something, or, with like whoever you might be doing work with. These things will come up all the time, and it's kind of a learning process. Every time you get feedback, you'll learn better and better ways to navigate it. But sometimes you just have to take yourself out of the equation.
Christina, safe to say an acquired skill? Brian?
Definitely.
Brian or Suzanne, anybody want to chime in before we go to the next question?
I mean, you're going to have to, I would say it is a skill you have to develop, because in any profession, I would assume, it's going to apply. I mean, workplaces, there's always some tension built in. You always have the boss-employee dynamic. And then, of course, in journalism, you have you're dealing, with the outside world where you're having your own conflicts, conflicts there. It's something you have to learn to navigate. And I agree with Christina. A lot of it depends on how it is delivered, and how you feel about the person delivering the feedback, right? I mean, if you respect them, and that's going to go a long way. If you feel that you are, that the relationship is not on steady ground, it's going to be harder to absorb the feedback. But you have to realize that you are now in a professional environment, and that this is part and parcel of the program.
Suzanne, just to come back to you for a second before we pivot to Brian, if he wants to add something to the question. I was just thinking about this as you were answering. What about you, the young journalist who thinks this is the story that has to be told and you can't find the editor to back you up? And I see Rosemary, I can see you on the screen there as well.
I've only dealt with that many, of course, we've all, Rosemary and I go way back, deal with that a lot, or deal with that. Obviously, as an editor, I mean, it's my responsibility to ensure the story or whatever, the photos or whatever is bulletproof. Generally, if the reporting, some cases it's a case of you need to go out to do more reporting. We live in a world where sometimes a lot of people don't want to go on the record. When I started out, going off the record was not the norm. These days it is not the norm, perhaps, but it's more frequent. Mm-hmm. So trying to get people to go on the record. It has to be verifiable. It has to be, you have to be able to defend it. It has to be, there are standards. And certainly if there's a conflict, we don't stand alone. We have other editors generally, and we have legal teams reviewing stories that would be if they get to a certain level. We've had reporters. I think most times when reporters, almost every time, not every time, but a lot of times when reporters say, and we say the story's not ready, we need ABC, we need another source, we need someone on a record, we need more documents, we need some documents. Reporters understand. I mean, we're all about, as news organization, what are we selling? We're selling our credibility, right? I mean, we are, and we rise and fall on that credibility. So it behooves all of us in the organization to make sure that the story is as credible as can be.
Brian, I didn't want to get too far off topic there, but I just thought that was really important for us with the journalist perspective. Do you want to add anything to the general question about feedback?
Just real quick, I think it's the real world. Personalities. I mean, you can't control other people. You can only control the way that you react to the news that's been given to you. So you're in complete control. But what I would offer is file all that away on how you were communicated to and how you felt, because eventually you will be the person on the other side giving the feedback to the individual. And I believe I've worked for some really wonderful people and I've worked for some really crappy people. The wonderful people are awesome, but I learned a heck of a lot more from the crappy people that I worked for. So
Excellent point. Yep. Yep.
And we've had so many of them so far already in this nearly hour. It's already gone by. I know there's a couple of questions that students had submitted that we want to make sure we ask as well. So let's talk about a fun topic really quick. Let's talk about money for a moment. I'm sure that's a fun topic for a lot of folks. So questions ranging the spectrum here, and I'll kind of give you the bandwidth to take these as you will. Part one, how does a student figure out what they're worth entering the job market? How do they kind of navigate that conversation about salary when they first start? In your roles now, when you look at these young employees, when do you know they're ready for that promotion? And if they think they're ready before you do, how do they approach you with that conversation about the word raise? I don't know if we're ready for that in the current economic situation we find ourselves in, but it's a three-parter. So salary, what's promotable, and last but not least, how do you ask for that raise if you think that you're not being valued enough? It's open question to the three of you.
I'll start. So entry-level salaries at a lot of PR agencies, speaking from experience at the one I currently lead talent for at and the previous ones I've supported, that entry-level salary is usually a fixed number, and you will usually hear about that in the first conversation that you're having with a hiring manager or talent acquisition person. So in the agency space, in an entry-level role or in an early career role, those salaries are either usually fixed or within a very specific band, and you'll hear about that really early on. So if you're looking at the agency space, a very quick search on Glassdoor will pretty much let you know, give or take, where a lot of these places are falling. So at least you can come to the table prepared for that conversation. And when someone is interviewing you and they say, what are your salary expectations, which they are able to ask. They can't ask you what you've earned previously, mind you, that is illegal. But if someone asks you, what are your expectations, have an answer. Have an answer prepared. Be ready to have that conversation because this is your career and these are your finances. So you have to feel secure in having that conversation. And it also is okay to say, what are you offering? But maybe not in the first conversation quite so explicitly. So that's one thing to point out, being aware of the market that you are trying to find a job in and what the salary bands tend to be within that market. You can do a lot of that research on your own. So arm yourself with that knowledge when you're going into interviews. I would recommend that. And then in terms of how do you know you're ready for a promotion? A lot of places will provide you with I would say the parameters, what you need to have achieved or a timeline or tenure that you need to have been with an organization with before you are promotion eligible. So when you're having your biannual review meetings or your check-ins with your manager, make sure you're hitting your marks. That way, when you have reached, okay, I've been here a year, I'm promotion eligible, am I being put up for it, why or why not? You can have those conversations and you can come to the table and say, I have checked all these boxes that we have been discussing throughout the year. And now I'm prepared to have that conversation because I feel like I've reached that point. And you will know when you're in a role, if you've reached the ceiling of your current job responsibilities, if you are no longer feeling challenged, you will know that. If every day becomes a little more monotonous and you're not learning as much, you're going to know that right away. So just pay attention to those things and be aware of what's expected of you too.
Brian or Sam, would you kind of chime in? And we have only about 5 or so minutes left, so.
I would.
Go Brian. Yeah.
I agree. It kind of runs the gamut from agency to agency, but I'm a little bit removed. Christina would know better than I would, but I know that there are ranges depending on title, and you can fluctuate within the range. In terms of how do you know when you're ready? Again, for us, we have policies and procedures in place, and it's almost like a program to try to get you through. So you're going to have, and your manager will go through, these are the tasks for this specific job. And everybody's a tad bit different. I've always been a little bit more conservative because the sense was, especially as you grow up and you elevate through the ranks, getting promoted is a big deal. you get more money, but there's more responsibility. You're expected to do more. The pressure's a little bit more. So a lot of times for folks who I promoted, they earned it. But the nice thing was when I could say to them, listen, you've been doing this for the last 3 months. I mean, essentially your job function isn't really changing. Now you have a bigger title and you're making more money. So I don't want you to feel the added extra pressure. And the other thing, one last point with an organization of our size, people tend to move within teams rather frequently. So if I have a colleague who comes to me and says, hey, I'm looking for an individual at this level and I'm looking at my numbers and maybe, we're in a little bit of a lull, maybe I'm a tad bit overstaffed and they need somebody at a level that maybe I can afford to give up. I'm confident knowing that when they move to the other team and they need somebody at that level, that person can do that job. It's the last thing, and I've seen it, somebody gets into that position and they're not quite at that level. And then it's bad for the person, it's bad for the team, and it's just a bad situation.
All very good feedback. We have hopefully 2 more questions we could squeeze in. I know we're right up against the clock here, so just throwing that out there. First and foremost, really quickly going around, if you didn't get your dream job in PR or journalism, so where you are now, where would you have been? Where do you think you'd be if you didn't have the jobs that you have now? Bit of a fun question and almost close this conversation off with. If you weren't where you were now, who or where would you be? Brian?
One of 2 things, either a professional soccer player,
okay,
or quite frankly, I had the opportunity to work for a number of clients in the world of NASCAR, a number of the tracks. I think if I knew how much I enjoyed that going in, my path maybe would have been more focused on how do I get a job with like ISC or NASCAR or somebody like that. Okay. I think for me that would kind of be a dream job a little bit. So,
Christina?
I got into talent acquisition by accident. That's what happens to most of us, if you didn't know that. I started out in casting, which I thought was cool because I wanted to work in the entertainment industry, and casting transitioned to education, which transitioned to recruitment. It kind of is in line, except I'm not hiring people for roles in movies anymore. So yeah, this happened by accident, but I kind of like where I am. So I'm just going to count my blessings.
Yeah, and accidents happen, and sometimes for all the right reasons, right? Suzanne, how about yourself?
I've been doing this for so many, I hate to tell you how many years I've been doing this. Okay. It's not even something but I guess I would say, probably teaching. I've always, I'm not person who necessarily would have worked out well in corporate. I like being in a newsroom. My whole career has been in a newsroom, but I could also see myself in the classroom.
Okay. And the last question I think we definitely have to ask here, because I know we're right up against the clock. This is all happening, this conversation, these moments in time. We're living through a period of hesitancy, of uncertainty, and hopefully that's coming more to an end as opposed to being in the middle of it. So the question is this: all the advice we talked about today, how does it relate to the workforce that students will be entering? We're learning remotely. Some work may continue to be done remotely or done at a hybrid level. Any kind of parting words in terms of the atmosphere these students will be graduating into, and any nuggets of advice you want to leave them as we end this conversation today? Open floor to the 3 of you.
I guess I'll start. I would say every generation faces its hurdles. Certainly a pandemic is something new, and something that, but I do believe as we're starting to come out of it. And I think we have seen what the past, we are seeing a renewed vigor in journalism. We're seeing people who are more interested in news, more interested in getting the story, getting an accurate story. And I think it is, not to be Pollyannish, but I do think it's a good time to enter in this profession, whether you enter and choose to stay your whole career as I have done, or enter and choose to stay for a while and learn the business and take it elsewhere. I do think it is a good time.
Suzanne, I just want to say thank you for that and being a part of this conversation today. And you know, we're seeing a resurgence as well of journalism with our program, and the Tower was just voted the #1 student newspaper this year. So we're really proud of that.
Excellent.
Christina, I'll go to you. Your advice and parting words.
I'm not saying goodbye to anybody here. Connect with me on LinkedIn.
All right.
We are hiring actively. We hire entry level all year round. I want to see the PR people. I want to see the comms people. I want to see the journalism people. Every conversation you have, you guys, is a really valuable one. Don't be afraid to show your faces. When you are participating in something like this, if it's an option, that way when you send a connection request on LinkedIn, people will remember you. And you are up against a lot more people out there right now that things are virtual. So candidates are coming in from different places where they may not have come from before. So as if things needed to be more challenging, they really can be in the job market. So whatever you can do to put yourself out there and be vulnerable sometimes, it's smart to do that. But I hope to hear from all of you.
Thank you, Christina. And likewise, we appreciate your support of our programs as always, and hopefully we see you in person in better times. Brian, we'll come to you.
Humans are resilient. We'll come back. We may crawl back and then jog and then run. Don't be afraid. I mean, yeah, the world's a big place, but there's opportunities around every corner. Just don't be afraid to speak up, raise your hand, try something new. Ask a lot of questions, be inquisitive, just try to learn as much as you can, and just take advantage. That there are opportunities there. I think sometimes people can have blinders on. There's opportunities all around. You just have to realize what they are and take advantage. So when you enter the workforce and you get a job, if you're finding that there's an area in the company that maybe is underserved, there's a service that maybe isn't all that great, or maybe it's just starting up, don't be afraid to raise your hand and be like, I'd like to give that a shot, because you never know what's going to happen.
And again, Brian, we appreciate you being part of this conversation today and your support for our program in the past, and curious to see where that can lead us going forward. I think on the Zoom you can do this. I'm going to raise my hands and applaud you all for a great hour you've spent with all of us here at Kean and abroad. We have a lot of folks today joining us from outside the Kean family, but we're all kind of in this together. So very appreciative of your time. I'm going to stop recording the event now. I know that we're already over time. If people want to linger for a couple minutes, they most certainly can, to be a little more informal. But going to stop the recording here, and we will post this at a later date and share with everybody on the call, as well as links to all 3 of our presenters' websites.